Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets played in their third preseason game, falling to the 76ers on the road. We take a look at what the lineup had to offer without Ben Simmons available for that evening's game. And also, what else is there to dive into in terms of the volume of three-point shooting? Not to mention, Jordi Fernandez don't care about preseason. He wants hustle and focus across the board. We dive in next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Keep that season going with big returns on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. And Doug, where we get started is preseason game number 3. Noah Clowney into the starting lineup for this one. There's a lot, I think, of sample size we're now getting through 3 games to take away from here, both on the court and then on the bench for Jordi Fernandez.
Yeah, look, I mean, sign of things to come possibly here. 117, 195. Sixers over the Nets. Nets were -7 when this thing closed. So to let you know how our friends over at FanDuel were thinking about the game. We're thinking about the game. Going in.
I don't know why that caught me. That one caught me. Nets -7.
Enjoy it, folks. You're not going to see another line like that the rest of the season. Obviously this is a game without Joel Embiid for the Sixers. It's a game without Paul George, who's injured. They're running out, effectively their bench unit. Their starters barely played any minutes. They got into the bench, pretty early on, but it didn't really matter for the Nets. But I did think we saw a bunch of stuff that we're going to probably see as a theme for the Nets all season long. One has to do with rotations, which we talked a little bit about yesterday. And 2 is just overall style and just what they're probably going to need to do in order to even try to stay in some of these games, right? Which is going to be very tough based on the personnel that they have. And so I think that there was I think some pretty clear takeaways of what their sort of standard operating procedure is going to be, especially on the offensive end. Even for a blowout, I didn't mind some of the things we saw here. And it's just a recognition that this season's going to be an uphill climb for this team just based on their overall talent level.
Yeah, I mean, that was on a high level. The first thing that you take away is, you go through this game, and you mentioned we understand the unit that was playing for Philadelphia, but just on a high level that you're in it, you're kind of going back and forth, you're having some good plays, there's some clunkiness. We'll talk about the things that Jordi Fernandez was focusing on in the post game. And then all of a sudden it kind of pulls away from you. Like that was my general sense was, and then it pulls away, right? They get outscored 30-16 in the fourth quarter. It's a preseason game. And I know some people will say, yeah, when it really matters in actual regular season games, it'll look different. You're right. It will look different. Joel Embiid will be out there, right? Paul George, if healthy, will be out there. And I think that we're going to probably see games like this. And we saw this even over the past handful of seasons when stars were out for Brooklyn. You can hang a ill-equipped roster or an under-suited roster for a matchup can hang for 2-3 quarters sometimes. And then talent prevails and you start to fade and you lose games by 20 points, right? Like, I just think that that's probably something that we'll be talking about a lot. What did we like from the first 3 quarters of a game? What did we like on an individual level? Because by the end of it, you're going to look up at that box score and see there were 3, 4, 5 possessions where the access was a little too easy on the defensive end, and Team X ended up piling on a little bit in the latter stages of the game. I'm fine with it, but it's going to be frustrating. Like, it is going to be hard to watch those games sometimes throughout this year.
Look, it's at halftime. I mean, the tail of this game really for me was at halftime, 70% of their shots were 3-pointers, right?
Yep.
Like, it ended up being 54% overall. They ended up taking 46 3-pointers in this game. The Sixers came back and ended up taking 40, but there was a much bigger discrepancy at halftime, right? Like, the Nets were just bombing. I mean, that's basically all they were doing was they were trying to get to the basket. It's really hard for them to do that. And if that wasn't that, they just took a lot of threes. So on the good news on that side, I think that strategy is correct for this team. They don't have enough on-ball creation to really make anyone pay in any real way on the defensive end, right? Across the board. They have a few guys that can kind of do it. Cam for sure can. But after that, it's really hard. So if that's going to be the case for the way the team is made up, then shooting threes mathematically is like easily the right call with where this team is. And on a high level, we saw plenty of possessions where one, it was clearly that's what's been drilled into them, right? Like that's what they need to do. Two, they worked extra hard to make extra passes when they could off of, especially on hard closeouts, where they made an extra pass. They were able to swing the ball one extra pass, two extra passes to get pretty clean looks. Didn't happen every time, but I thought we saw enough of it to say, okay, that's probably a sign of things to come over the season. But if you're going to run a starting lineup out there of Cam Johnson, Noah Clowney, Dorian Finney-Smith, and then two smaller guards, I really actually don't even know what other strategy you can take, honestly.
No.
There's not that many levers to pull when this is your unit. And then Jalen Wilson coming off the bench, he's going to be able to shoot pretty well. And they have some other guys. Zaire Williams was able to hit 1 for 2. At least he was willing to take a couple here. Overall, though, for me, I think the Nets fans need to really just sit back and get settled into like, this is what you're going to see. They're going to take a lot of 3-pointers. We said it year over year that they have to just kind of just bomb threes in order to just stay in games. And on the nights where they shoot 30% or under, it's going to get ugly. It's just going to get ugly. And it doesn't mean that the strategy is incorrect for this group of players. I just think that fans need to probably get used to it. It's a little different year because the stakes here this year are different than other seasons.
No, but you just mentioned year over year comes back to the construction of the roster. When you feel like you're an undersized team, like to your point, there's not. Now you go back to last season and the adjustment.
Well, can I pause you real quick? Sorry to interrupt you, but like real quick, I push back. They're not undersized. They're underskilled. They are undersized to some degree, but it's like they can't get better shots because they don't have enough skill players to punish defenses. Sorry to
right. I mean, you're not talking about, Zaire Williams and Noah Clowney aren't going to punish into the paint at this point and put the pressure on a defense at the rim in that regard. We saw this from Ben Simmons in the second game. We're okay. If he can do that, then it makes a difference. I guess undersized, I'll put it in the way that we talked about it before in years past. Undersized as in you just don't have, you still are not a physical team. Like you're still not a physical team that has the ability to, even if it's going to be inside out basketball, get the ball down into the paint, into the low block, and have that player make the decision. Noah Clowney, we think, is developmentally capable of being in the low block and then finding outlet passes. But because either the access into the paint is not as easy as it is for a lot of bigger players around the league, stronger players, more physical players around the league, then you end up getting into, which I think is the right mold. Hey, we got to spread this out. We got to make the extra passes. We got to knock down triples. A year ago, when you saw Cam Thomas getting caught up in a lot of ISO ball, sometimes the double teams disjointed him, or he was just willing to hold on to it too long and then put up ugly shots, even though he can make some of those. This is a good transition. It's now make the extra passes, right? Keep trying to find the extra easier, more open look for teammates. The difference is going to be here, whether or not we fully buy into it. In preseason so far, guys like Dorian Finney-Smith, he's been very consistent, 25% from beyond the arc, right? Cam Johnson knocks down 3 of 9. He put up a lot of shots, some deep ones as well. We always say they're going to regress back to their averages, and that's all going to work out. But it is the sample size where you go, yeah, well, if you're not knocking those down, then you're going to have difficult games trying to overcome, especially the talent gap that you're going to face most nights in the NBA. Coming up here in a second, though. Let's go ahead and see what we saw on an individual level. Noah Clowney gets into the starting lineup. Have we seen a progression from him on the court? And what other combinations did we glean here as we continue to basically know what the rotation is going to look like heading into the regular season? We'll get into that in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. No better time to get in the action than over on FanDuel right now. America's #1 sportsbook. You can get a big return, especially if you get in the middle of the game. You want to get some of that live betting going. You can check the latest stats. You can get in on the play-by-play. Maybe you just got a hunch about what's going on during the game. Like you saw the flow of this game with Sixers and Nets, and you're thinking to yourself, hey, there's no way Nets are coming back in this one. I can kind of see it coming. Or you think, oh, maybe the Nets just need to run a little hotter from 3, and they're going to be able to make up some of that ground. It's all there for you over on FanDuel. They got the live in-game betting. They got tons of player props for NFL Sundays. I mean, more than you could ever even hope to sort through on a given day. It's all there for you over on FanDuel. You can also get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 real money bet. Grab those $200 in bonus bets with a first $5 real money bet over at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about preseason game number 3 against the 76ers, the Brooklyn Nets fall in this one, 117-95. Before we talk about on an individual level, fundamentally, we close out the first segment there with, in terms of lack of physicality and the new look of the same premise that we've seen in years past. What were your
Yeah,
thoughts on
sorry.
that?
And when I said like they weren't undersized is the biggest problem, they are undersized. You are correct. Like they did, like when you're trotting Noah Clowney out as your starting five against Andre Drummond, you're gonna have some physicality problems. I don't disagree with that actually. I guess I more was meaning their bigger issue is that they just don't have enough offensive talent. Like you can get away with being undersized if you ran out 4 like high-end wing creators, you wouldn't worry too much about being undersized, right? Because you would just be so punishing on the offensive end that you could just end up making up for it, right? You could punish defenses, you can get to the basket, because we all know that the only way to really stretch and tax a defense is by having, not the only way, the best way is to have one guy who the other defense has to pay extra attention to because that guy can beat their primary defender. If you have a guy who can beat the primary defender, so you have to bring doubles, you have to bring help, you have to dig, like you have to do all this stuff. The second you do that, the geometry just starts working in your favor as a team, right? The second someone else has to help even a little bit off of their guy, the geometry starts swinging back in your favor. If you have 2 guys, and the geometry really works, right? Because now, like you end up opening the slivers and the cracks of the opposing defense for to get shooters, open shots, to get guys cutting back, backdoor to the rim, to get guys cutting baseline. Like those are all the little things. So really, to me, it always starts there. If your offense looks stagnant, it's almost, I know everyone's be like, oh, it's stagnant, it's the coaching. Okay. Yeah, kind of. But if you, like all the coaching in the world,
players that can penetrate the defense,
all the coaching in the world, if you and I and 5 guys that are like us went out into the court, and it's an overstatement, but it's an overstatement to shine a light on what the reality is. All the coaching in the world, we would lose 600-0, right?
Yeah.
So okay, if you believe that to be true, then just keep scaling it up until you get to like where the Nets level is in terms of talent, and realize that when you don't have guys who can beat their primary defenders, you're never going to be able, it's going to be so hard to open up things on the court that are going to be in your favor. That's really all I mean. So I agree with you. They're undersized, and they also have this other issue.
Well, listen, if you're going to be undersized, you might as well also not have the ability to break.
Well, I guess my point is you could run out 5 Steph Currys, right?
Yes,
you could run out 5 Steph Currys, and you would lose the rebounding battle, and you would lose defensively, but you'd also be able to get some stuff done offensively, right? Because you can just tax the defense in a certain way.
Yeah, keep it in house, right? Kyrie Irving, like this is what we always talk. We always talk about when you have superstars on your roster, it makes everything easier. Kyrie Irving's not the biggest guy in the world, but he can break down anybody off the dribble. He can get into the paint when he wants to. He can finish at the rim. He can contort his body in ways that he needs to, and he's the type of talent, as many stars of the league are, that require more than one defender to watch them, that require the entire defense to be aware of where that player is. And while we like Cam Thomas's game, we think it's developing great. When you only have one of those guys on the court that is at least coming towards that level of play on the offensive end, you're going to leave this gap. And there's just nobody else, to your point right now, that you would look to on the Nets roster that can fill that void and force defenses to maybe have to make difficult decisions on a possession-to-possession basis. The starting lineup that we talked about in this one, obviously no Ben Simmons in this. Noah Clowney comes in, 22 minutes, 5-8 from the field, 1 of 4 from beyond the arc for him, gave you 8 rebounds, gave you 2 assists, couple of blocks. Like, there's a lot to like from him. I think I'll go back to when we talk about our minutes and projecting out how the season's going to start. Everyone knows, if you follow the show, I'm the guy that likes to get overexcited about the young players. Not taking anything away from Noah Clowney. I think he played well. Also, I think that he still has obviously a long way to go in his development. And just this game overall to me looked like that. Some good, some bad. He's still a slight guy. When I watch him run up the court, I picture Nicholas Claxton in his first couple of seasons being still very thin, 20 pounds more, still looks light. So it's not a bad thing, but it was a good reminder that this is a great season for a player like that, because the stakes will be lower and you can try to focus in on the little details and just get better in all these areas.
Yeah, for sure. Overmatched by Drummond at times. Did have some nice blocks. Had a really nice block early in the game where it was just this right on one verticality block, which I thought was very impressive. Like, awesome body control. We've seen that from Nick Claxton over the years. Like, he has great body control around the rim and great instincts for where players are going to be and putting up their shots. And that's one of the reasons he's one of the better shot blockers in basketball, is just like his understanding of that. And I saw that there was a couple, I thought both blocks from Clowney kind of were like that. What were you gonna say?
No, and that's why we want Nicholas Claxton to be playing in these preseason games, or why we're
Yeah.
excited to see in the regular season. The two of them together with that type of versatility and body control around the basket, like that's what gets you excited defensively for that tandem.
That's the best version of it because Clowney's going to be able to stretch the floor a little bit. Look, these guys in the Nets are always going to be. I'm Clowney too. It's sometimes going to look a little clunky offensively because guys like this need good point guards and ball handlers to be able to unlock the things they do. That's just not their core skill set, and so sometimes that, not having guys like that all the time in the court will make it look a little tougher for him, like it would be for most guys of his ilk, right? Stretch fours, slider fives, guys like this that aren't going to be able to put the ball on the deck a lot and be able to get to the rim. They're going to need some other talent around them to really unlock what they're able to do well. So I think good sign for his development. We said just that he's in the starting lineup. It's clear what the Nets plan for him is this year, which is really great news. It's like there's no real question about there's no question about what the plan is for him. He is probably at worst the sixth man this year, and maybe worse seventh man. But I really think it's like sixth man and spot starter is what we're going to see. And then maybe by the end of the year, sort of full-time starter. I think that's probably the path for him as they maybe clear out some of the veterans. And to me, that's a great sign. I mean, for a 20-year-old to be able to show that he can already hang, even if it's just going to look not 100% greater. That's fine. 20 years old, man, for a guy like, if you can just make a case to be an NBA level starter at 20, you're so far ahead, especially where he was drafted. Like, or that age and drafted top 10 where everyone agreed that he was just this high-end lottery pick. That's a little different. For a guy who was picked in the 20s, who might have slipped further, if the Nets hadn't taken him right there, like, it's just such a great sign that he can already do it. And it's such a win. I mean, it's already a Marks win for me no matter really almost no matter how this season plays out for him. To me, this is Sean Marks nailed this one in the draft. And that one I feel comfortable saying that now, and the season hasn't even started.
Oh, of course. And remember when they drafted him at the time, you and I thought, hey, like we'll keep an eye on him over the next year or two and see. Oh,
that's putting it nice. That's putting it nice. Like you're okay. I'm gonna.
I was excited. Yeah, like if we.
That's not what we said. Like that you are. Like, it's okay. I'll just put it my point of view. That's not what I said. I was like, oh, come on. Like, and the reason I haven't documented is because, one, I know we wanted Max Prosper more. That one looks bad. Like we'd much rather have Clowney. I just know exactly what it is. And the reason it's memorialized for me is because Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy, I must have said something on Twitter about, oh, they shouldn't have done this, or we don't like it, or yuck. And I know that our breakdown of him, because we did a longer term analysis into Clowney coming out of Alabama, and it was like, I don't know, hard to see it, not versatile enough. And then Josh Lloyd jumped in and was like, I love it. Nets got one here. And then he's reminded me multiple times about that sense. So that's the reason I know. That's the reason I know for a fact. I just didn't want you. I'll put it in my. No. It wasn't just a we'll see. Mine was like a deep sigh because we wanted someone else.
I see. So I do remember. So I like putting it in that we said, hey, like we'll look back in a couple of seasons and see how he's developed. Like I thought that's where we landed on, but. It's the Max Prosper was the problem because I got to a point where I was like, oh, baby, this is the guy that we need here. It's the guy that we want, the guy that you have to have. So anytime, as we talk about with our draft classes, when they go a different direction, it's just hard to peel yourself back from that. So no. I want to listen, we are nothing if not honest about where we were when we thought something and where we are now. And where we are now is we were wrong. And Josh Lloyd was right. And it's a good thing that he was around to remind us of that so we can be excited about Noah Clowney going forward. I'll just throw this in real quick before we move on to a couple other player thoughts and also Jordi Fernandez. Noah Clowney was asked in the post game about any of the challenges moving between forward and center, power forward and center. Sometimes I have lapses where I'm thinking I'm at the 4 and I'm thinking I'm at the 5 when I'm not. It's just getting better with that, knowing my coverages when I'm at the 4 and my coverages when I'm at the 5, and knowing what to do offensively in both spots. It's just something I got to get better at. I say that because remember a year ago, as a rookie, all of the reports from everybody inside the organization was that this guy is a human sponge. You tell him something, you teach him something, he digests it, and he applies it. So these are fun things when you hear him, as we saw him in the offseason, saw him last year. He speaks very honestly, speaks very thoughtfully, and clearly as a guy, gets it. This is about getting better, improving, taking coaching, and applying it. So always good things to see from Noah Clowney. Now, coming up here in a second, Let's talk about Jordi Fernandez and whether or not anyone should be rubbed the wrong way. You shouldn't, about his intensity, even in a preseason game. We'll get into that here to close things out in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at Hims. Looks, guys, sometimes intimate moments, they happen spontaneously. You want to be ready. You want to be able to perform in the bedroom. We've all been there. Hims provides access to treatments to help you last longer, give you that boost of confidence. Be ready for whenever the mood strikes. Look, your sex life is important. Your schedule's busy. Look, sometimes you don't have time to go to the doctors to get treated through Hims. You can get a personalized treatments without stepping foot outside your door. You'd love to hear that. Hims is changing in men's healthcare, providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Win, baby. Process 100% online. No need for uncomfortable doctor visits. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's Hims, HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. Hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products, which are not approved for or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan.
All right, as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about preseason game number 3. Yes, the Brooklyn Nets lost to the 76ers on the road. No, it doesn't particularly matter. But you can bring up any other players that you want to, point to here. I think, again, you said, hey, this feels like we are seeing where the rotation is going to be. We're seeing the first few players that are even coming off the bench. Nothing new here in terms of what the Nets don't have. Killian Hayes, could be going by the wayside here. Keon Johnson gets back into the mix here, doesn't play that much. So nothing really changed, I think, in terms of our sample size. Go ahead.
Keon Johnson had a rough one. I feel bad. Like
what I feel good about Keon Johnson? Because you can talk about his game in a second, but I respect the fact that Keon Johnson got into it with Andre Drummond and said, "Hey, you want to go, buddy? You want to tussle? Listen, you got me by fivefold. I don't care. Let's dance."
Yeah, I mean, Andre Drummond could put Keon Johnson on his shoulder and spin him around fireman style. But I did appreciate yes. That Keon Johnson did not seem to care about that physical, the physical differences between them. Yeah, he had a rough game. He took 3 shots and 2 of them were just straight awful. But it was injured last game. So I think that there's definitely still a role for him here. I think we saw again. We talked about Shake Milton on the last episode. They kind of need him. It's really kind of weird. It's not weird, but they're gonna just need him to play lots of backup point guard for this team. I think. I know Simmons wasn't here. I mentioned Shake Milton, and everyone jumps on me and says, "What about Killian?" I mean, Killian Hayes hasn't stepped on the court for the Nets. I'm not sure exactly what people are thinking is going to happen here, but
yeah, I want to be proven wrong. How can we be? Yeah, how can you?
How can we be? I want to see him play. I hope he gets a chance. It's just that he hasn't played. But I think we saw from Shake that he's actually one of the few guys that can get to the rim, because if you look at the shot discrepancy for a lot of these guys, so Dorian Finney-Smith, mostly threes. Clowney was half threes, but he's also in the block. Cam Johnson, 9 of his 11 shots were from 3. Schroeder can do it, right? 11 shots, threes. We know Cam can do it. After that, though, Jalen Wilson, 6 of his 7 shots were from 3. Derek came in for 5 minutes and missed everything, but two out of his 3 shots. And then Zaire is more back cutting and trying to get to the rim off of other players' actions. So at that point, the math isn't really working for too many other players that are going to be, tasked with dribbling the ball and then putting up a shot where it's not just all 3. So I think that, I already ran the risk of reading everyone's stat line, which is, obviously just great podcasting. But the point is, if you just look by the numbers and the percentages, Shake is just one of the few guys that can do the thing we talked about at the top of the episode. So I think they kind of need him. I think that, and I think he's got a for sure role in this team, sort of no matter what happens.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you brought him up, because when we were talking about that ball handling, I didn't want to jump into the bench unit where you say 20 minutes, 5 of 9, 2 of 4 from beyond the arc. Hold on, let me just check here real quick. Now he was a -8, but then Williams was a -16. And then, no, we won't go that far down that rabbit hole. Bottom line is they are going to need him. I think you're right. And we talked about this last episode, just in terms of, I believe, and so Doug believes in developing the youth as well. But Doug also accurately stated, hey, more of the veterans are going to start the season. That's just the way it's going to go. It's the way the NBA works. Having these veterans matters to the development of the young players. And whether or not we like Keon Johnson, he needs to continue to prove that he's capable of doing things that are going to be asked of him so the offense can flow. Shake Milton does he has his role. Like he feels very much like Schroeder. It's like, these are guys that you undervalue, never going to get maybe massive contracts. Schroeder did pick up a big one along the way, but you're going to look at these guys as kind of unheralded players that you like having on your roster. They may seem like they matter less because the Nets aren't going to win a lot of basketball games this year, but it matters to have a functional offense. It matters to not fall into those pits where you're looking at 5 guys, as Doug mentioned at the top, on the court and going, how are we going to function beyond passing it aggressively around the perimeter and trying to get someone to get an open look? So it was a good game for him. And right now, I'd put him in that top group. We'll round out after the preseason on where the roster stands, but Milton has done nothing but put good tape on there for Jordi Fernandez to say, yeah, probably another veteran that's going to have a role for us moving into the season. The other thing I just wanted to touch on here, coming out of this game, you had Jordi Fernandez. They asked him about, what he liked, what he didn't like, attention to detail. I wanted to make sure that if I could, I hit the quote that was asked by Eric Slater in the post game, who obviously does great coverage of this team. And it's specifically around Noah Clowney. I thought he didn't fight hard enough. This is about the closeout right there at the start of the second half in the third quarter. It's definitely a challenge, but I would have liked to have seen a better fight. It's not just Noah, it's everyone. If we don't play hard as a team, we're just not going to be good enough to win. And there was some pushback on this around the idea that because it's going to be a long season and because the Nets are going to lose a lot of games, Jordi Fernandez should temper his expectations and the way that he approaches plays like that. We're in the moment live watching that game when he called that timeout and stepped right into the court and was pointing at Noah Clowney and saying, like, hey, like, what are you doing? Or what are you not doing here? I thought that was fantastic. I was like, here's a guy that's trying to establish what his expectations are. You could lose 82 games this year. If you don't instill, especially with the young players, a sense of expectation, role, understanding where you need to be on the court, and that you need to play hard every single play, every single possession, I couldn't imagine the negative footprint that you put in place going into the following year. If you have 3 or 4 guys on this roster that you believe can be a part of it going forward, you're going to sit here and say, take a year off. That seemed like such a bad way to look at a head coach that is trying to instill his identity on the team, even in preseason.
Yeah, I think it's the whole point of why you have this guy is that he's just not going to let anyone off the hook. It's a little easier for a guy like Clowney to get on him, right? Not a veteran, young player. You're not going to, I'm not sure you would, take any any NBA, any
Cam
like
Johnson,
veteran guy
if he didn't quite get out there, or Dorian Finney-Smith even.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't think that would happen. I think it's less likely to happen for those guys because those guys just do play hard and they kind of do understand where to be more. And I think that like those have never been problems for those guys. And it's not a problem for Clowney either. Right. But I think that that's a good thing to instill because for sure what's going to happen is later on this season, when hopefully some of these veterans get traded, there is going to be more of a meritocracy around like who just needs to play and who shouldn't. And I think now it's basically based on, financial like considerations and sort of years in the league. Again, fine. But the later it won't be. And so instilling this, hey, no one's role is set here, is a good thing. And I think tomorrow we'll talk a little bit. One thing this isn't a whole podcast, but this is a tease for tomorrow as we prep for the final preseason game, is that I think there's like a clear difference of Cam Thomas in the defensive end, like in terms of just energy.
I said that game one. Said it game one.
Yesterday, and we'll talk a little bit more. So we'll get into that a little bit more because I think that's been very encouraging. To see how he's acting at that end. And I think that's actually a direct sign of like what we're talking about with Jordi Fernandez is that it's hey, you got to get after it or it's not guaranteed for you maybe. Right. Or maybe a contract's not guaranteed. Like we have to see there's something going on there. And I think it probably stems like sort of top down organizationally, probably with what Fernandez is instilling.
Yeah, set a clear expectation. He talked about, and we'll get into this more tomorrow, but and this is for everybody, not just Cam Thomas. Set an expectation, tell the players how you get to goal X, Y, or Z, and then hold them to it. And if you're delivering on what's being asked of you, the result, more playing time, more opportunity, all of those things are going to come. So I think it's a great way to approach this season. And anybody that thinks otherwise, I just think is selling themselves short on what it takes to develop a strong core and good habits, especially in young players early in their careers. That's it for me.
Yeah, look, you look at Adam and I, and you just know just 2 guys that hold themselves to high standards. Like that's just what, and you just take get a good look at the screen here. If you're over on YouTube, take a good look and just say, you're just like getting yourself high standards. So of course we would appreciate that from Jordi Fernandez.
You think a man with a
It's just
mustache like this doesn't have high standards?
it's went from one pro to another to a couple other pros. That is kind of how it goes. Okay, we're gonna get out of here. Look, we're gonna talk a little bit about this final preseason game tomorrow.
Yeah, we are.
In the meantime, go over to wegotnets.com and grab yourself the 2024-2025 season preview. We outline the 4 biggest storylines. It's totally free. Just got to throw in your email. No other information. Throw in your email. You're just going to get 4 stories that we wrote up over the course of the last couple of weeks that just outline some of the biggest stories going into this season. So you'll be all caught up and you'll be ready to go. You go to wegotnets.com and grab that.
There is only one way to avoid criticism. Do nothing, say nothing, and be nothing. Why, that is Aristotle.
One of the all-time great poets. We're back in tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.